unaussprechlichen Ramble.
Crowley also used to say that magic is the art of life itself. I cannot tell you if magic is real or not. What I can tell you, if we set up the space and we evoke the demon Belial will come.
Welcome back to Unaussprechlichen Ramblen. I'm Marco Visconti, and the voice you heard in the teaser was mine, since this is a special episode. While I'm still planning the long-awaited Season 2, and I promise it's coming, I've been invited to Leamington Spa, the birthplace of the great beast himself, to chat about magic for modern times with Luke Robert Mason, my gracious host for the evening and the mastermind behind the excellent Futures podcast. It turned out to be a memorable evening, and so far, the time I was best able to articulate my ideas on these topics, and I hope you will find it enjoyable as well. Remember to check out the show notes to learn more about my book, my ongoing and upcoming courses and classes, and of course, to check out Luke Robert Mason's podcast and website. If you have a minute to spare, give the podcast a nice 5-star rating, it helps a lot. And now, on with the unspeakable ramble.
My name is Luke Robert Mason, and we're going to talk about Aleister Crowley tonight. Now, there's a joke that anybody who ends up in Leamington Spa finds it really difficult to leave. And those who do leave, well, they often come back. And we might say that is magical in its own right. It might be a magical place. Some claim that the reason for that is because of the ley lines. Others argue that it's simply the train lines. But there are those who attribute the attraction to Leamington Spa to one Aleister Crowley, the beast, Leamington Spa's most infamous alumnus, the wickedest man in the world. Now, so much is misunderstood about Crowley. He's known as a mountaineer, as a poet, as a theologian, as a black magician, as a spy, as a drug fiend, and as a sex addict. But one thing we know for sure is that Crowley was born here, in Royal Leamington Spa in 1875 at apparently 30 Clarendon Square, which may go some way to explaining his weird choice of pastimes. One interesting historical rumor, and the reason you might be aware of him, is that Crowley was recruited by Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond films, to perform rituals against Hitler. It's actually said that Churchill's V for Victory was developed by Crowley as a counter-sigil against the Nazis' swastika. It's highly likely that Uncle Al may have even visited this venue, this very building. At the time of his birth, it was the Westminster Temperance Hotel Coffee Tavern. Crowley even authored a short book of poems called Temperance, and one would like to believe that this space perhaps had some influence. Oh, that's probably to do with a tarot card. Regardless of the controversies that surrounded the man and the numerous ways he's appeared in popular culture, Crowley's most endearing legacy is one of a body of knowledge related to the practice of magic. Thelema, developed by Crowley, is an occult spiritual philosophy that aims to enable you to learn your one true will and achieve union with the all. So to help us to understand what that truly means and to show us how we might be able to embrace a more magical way of thinking in our everyday lives is my guest here today. And I'd love you to put your hands together and welcome author, Thelemite Marco Visconti to the birthplace of the beast.
Thank you very much. That was a fantastic introduction. Well, you said everything already. We can go home and drink.
Well, Marco, we had a fascinating discussion outside, and I felt bad because we left everybody in the basement while we were having that fascinating discussion, but people might not realize that Aleister Crowley, say it how you want, we're going to learn a lot about how magic is really just about a style rather than a doctrine. He might be responsible for a lot more than we realize in Leamington Spa. In fact, his father might be the real reason that so many people were able to get to Leamington Spa today.
I mean, apparently, yes. I mean, according to Richard Kaczynski, which is still the best biographer of Crowley.
We're working.
Working perfect. Magic works, right? Well, first of all, you got to understand that Crowley was born in a very, very rich family, a strange one. I think we should discuss a little bit like his upbringing, right? So for those of you who don't know, like he was born into this almost like a beer empire. The Crowley's family was the owner of Alton Brewery and Crowley and Co. Brewery, and we're talking about the late 1700s, beginning of 1800s now. And for instance, they were the inventors of the pub lunch, believe it or not. Like one of the reasons why they were so successful, because you get yourself drunk, but you also want to eat a little bit, right? The thing is that they also, because they had to move the beer from their breweries, which was in Alton and in the area, back to London. Well, they kind of lobbied for the train lines to be built, right? So if we have train lines, the famous train lines you were mentioning before, right? Maybe we have to thank them. Also, at some point, Edward Crowley, which was an engineer by trade, but in fact it was just upper gentry, he decided that he had to embrace his fate. Because, of course, when you have a lot of money and you don't have to work, you go and find God, apparently. Crowley would do the same, in fact. The thing with Edward Crowley is that he decided that God was found in a very exclusive cult, if you want to call it like that, called, the Exclusive Brethren, which was, an ultra-reactionary sect of the Plymouth Brethren. The kind of like religious figures that really believe that you should only read the Bible and nothing else. And all the answers come from the Bible. So he sells his stocks in the brewery, because of course drinking is bad, to his brother, and come over here to Leamington Spa right before Crowley was born, because here the Amsterdam company was building all the waterworks, and he thought it was be a very nice area to start a family, really. They wouldn't last here very long though, because only 5 years they spent in Leamington Spa. By the time it was 1880, Crowley's sister Grace was born, but died almost immediately. And Crowley's mother was distraught, as you can imagine that, and they decided to move somewhere else. I don't remember exactly where. Eventually, they end up in London, though. I can tell you that. What else can I say? Well, there's this story about the few days before Crowley was born, in fact. So he was born on the 12th of October, 1875. Few days before, on the 8th of October, if you go and look, in the library, and you look for, paper clips, newspaper clips from the time, apparently, gale force winds happen here in Leamington. And I mean, if you go to Clarendon Square, where they were born, somebody actually told me the kind of it's kind of like uprise, like it's not like on the level of the Leam, but apparently the house got flooded. So that's what happened when a great beast is born, apparently.
So if the River Lem floods, contact all your friends who are currently pregnant, because they might be giving birth to the Antichrist or the beast. And Marco, in your mind, so there's so many of these different misconceptions and ideas of who Aleister Crowley, Uncle Al, was. But in your mind, who do you think he was? What is his lasting legacy?
Crowley was a polymath. He was, by all means, a genius. He was a super, super keen mountaineer. I mean, he mounted expeditions all over the Alps, all over the Pennines, and he attempted to climb the K2. It wasn't successful, but he did attempt it before everybody else. He was very good friend with Oscar Heckenstein, which was very famous mountaineer to this day. And he did all of this before he was 30, right? He was really, and at the same time, he was a poet. He was incredibly good chess player. He was an incredible human being. He was a flawed human being. It's not the kind of person I would want as a friend, for instance, because he used to treat his friends, his lovers, both male and female, quite badly. But at the same time, he was a pioneer also in the realm of gender identity. He was, by what we would call today, a gender fluid individual, and he never made excuses for that, right? And you can imagine, we're at the moment we moved from Victorian times into Edwardian times. I mean, Oscar Wilde got exiled for that, right? And he never cared. He just went. I mean, maybe being a trust fund kid helped. you have the kind of surety about yourself when all the bills are paid. But then again, he didn't care about money because he always invested everything he had into his own pursuit of life itself. He was a lover of life, and this love of life is absolutely the center of Thelema. Thelema is a Greek word from Koine Greek, which means will, from the verb telo, and will is can be interpreted in many different ways, right? First of all, it's not whatever you want. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. It's a very strict discipline that should lead you to know your true purpose. And not just so much your, as in, look, but maybe that slice of divinity that's beyond the mask of look, right? And so finding that true purpose was Crowley's, attempt for his entire life. It's interesting to see. We can discuss it all night to see if he was successful or not. I think, having been studying him, reading him for most of my life now, I think he succeeded every time he was channeling the muse as a poet, as a mystic, and I think that every time he tried to make it more, easy for the people, I think he failed that. But that's why I'm here today. I'm trying to do that right now.
Well, we'll talk about Thelema in a second, but fast forward to the 21st century. Why do you think a character like him still endures? Why does it still appear in popular culture? Why are people still interested in his practices and the history of his version of the occult?
I think that as human beings, we love to see an almost impossible goal, right? We always try to put ideals on pedestals, right? And Crowley kind of is one of this almost impossible idea. Like I said, imagine that you are a mountaineer, a polymath, a poet, and also, lo and behold,
sex addict and a drug fiend.
Of course. I mean, all geniuses like that tend to be like that. But also like the prophet of the new year. And like, oh my God, like it's almost like Moses, like a living Moses that lived 100 years ago. Think about it, right? So that's definitely a lasting appeal of Crowley. Definitely was the appeal that, people in the 60s, famous people in the 60s, I'm thinking of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Kenneth Anger, Led Zeppelin, they latched upon that, possibly because they were, groundbreaking people, geniuses in their own ways, and so they latched upon. And it's to be fair, it's thanks to them that we even know about Crowley. Crowley kind of disappeared by the time he was dead in '47 till the 60s come rolling. People kind of forgot about him. There's many reasons why, mostly because his disciples kind of failed at carrying on the legacy. But then it was Jimmy Page and all those famous people that brought him back into the forefront. Now, I think that there's a problem there, and the problem is that this almost slavish pedestal seeking, it's the antithesis of Thelema, right? Thelema teaches you of putting yourself on the pedestal. Like you should become the sun of your own solar system. And unfortunately, what I noticed in the last 30 years that I've been, interested in Crowley and being member of groups, orders and whatnot, is that a lot of what we call ourselves Thelemites, right? Like, the followers of Aleister Crowley, the followers of Thelema. Most of the times, you don't have Thelemites, you have Crowleyites. You know what I mean? Like those who want to be him, as opposed to those who want to be the best version of themselves, find their own purpose. So in the 21st century, I think we still need this catalyst, a person like him that can be a catalyst of change. People can be inspired by what he wrote. People can be inspired by this very interesting life. Like I said, he had ups and downs, but he never relented. His magical name, the first one he took was as an initiate of the Golden Dawn, was Perdurabo. Perdurabo is Latin for I will endure till the end. And there's an interesting there, because if you see it as Perdurab 0, I will endure till the end, because in the end there's nothing to endure. So this is the idea of like going through the very end of it. Unfortunately, if you want to become Crowley number 2, you're not going to do that.
Sorry to anybody who came today hoping for that outcome. It's interesting that someone who originally founded so much of the occult as we understand it in the modern world became a cult in his own right, the cult of personality. But you were saying that he was this wonderful polymath, but he was also this contradiction. And do you think there's something interesting that we can all learn from being not just polymaths, but contradictions, living in that liminal space in between things and not trying to solidly define ourselves in life?
I mean, absolutely. Crowley himself never tried to, be one thing, right? He definitely thought he had some what we call today mystical, religious, magical revelations, and he decided to put his trust into these revelations and follow them. But he always was a very, like you say, like a liminal character, right? He was embodying very characters. He was donning different masks at the same time. So I think that should be the lesson, really, like sort of almost like an alchemical fluidity about it, like the mercury of alchemy. There's this mystical element that moves through the world, but also binds the sulfur, binds the salt, creates the prima materia. I mean, that's the magician. Like really, literally, it is the nature of the magician being this multiform character.
You bring up the word magician and bring up this idea of magic with a K, which is going to be very important. Anybody who came here thinking they were going to get card tricks, I apologize now. Although
I'm terrible at that.
Yeah, okay. No, you're not getting card tricks. But this idea of magic, I mean, I first encountered it through Robert Anton Wilson, the writings of Robert Anton Wilson, and I was introduced to Raw through Douglas Rushkoff, a mentor of mine. And Robert Anton Wilson had this beautiful phrase, which was, "I don't believe in anything, but I have my suspicions." And if you had to be a little suspicious for a second, would you say magic is real?
What is real?
Oh, forget the word magic. We're good with magic, but real is the word we want to interrogate. Okay, all right.
So I think that, of course, that's the crux of the question, right? First of all, again, magic with the K. Magic with the K, it's a specific thing, right? I call it the tool of Thelema, in the sense that magic with the K and Thelema kind of go as, they go together. Magic with the K, if you don't know what we're talking about, you can think of it as a very unique blend of Western esoteric tradition and Eastern practices. So a magic with the K, so the system that Crowley put together, will teach you to breathe and visualize, and pretty much like yoga, okay? Pranayama, asana, dhyana, dharana, etc., all the 8 limbs of yoga, as per Patanjali. But also will teach you that those are, beats that you have to go through in order to find your own center and to expand your senses. By doing that, you can then truly engage with what most of you will think of magic, drawing a circle in the ground and drawing a triangle, putting a mirror in it, and then chanting strange names, and then something will happen in there. Does this happen? Is it in my head? Is it outside? It doesn't matter, really. Crowley described magic as many different ways, right? But the most important one, at the beginning of Liber O, which was one of his first attempt of creating a manual of practical magic, he says that, and I'm not quoting verbatim, but he said that in these books you will hear of Sephiroth, of planes, of gods, of things that may or may not exist. Whether they exist or not is irrelevant. What's important is that if you do certain things, certain results will happen. And he also insists on saying that the student is earnestly required not to put any objective validity in it. So the idea is that magic puts the ball in your court, in the sense, say, don't ask yourself if it's true or not. Don't ask yourself if these gods are real. Don't ask yourself if these demons are real, these angels are real. Is that you call them, if something answer, well, see what they have to say. Robert Anton Wilson was one of those at the forefront of what we nowadays call the psychological model of magic. And Crowley himself actually was flirting with it, because think about it, Crowley was, living the same years as Carl Jung. And so, and as we know today, Carl Gustav Jung was an alchemist, really. I mean, the Red Book, the Black Books and the Red Book kind of proved that he was actually trying to make sense of this new, internal landscape that he found with the archetypes. He was trying to make sense of to present them to the public in a way that public will accept them. But then he also, intimate to his foundation to never release the Red Book until like 50 years or so. We have the Red Book only for the last 20 years or something. And the Red Book, if you read it, it's alchemy. Like it's straight up alchemy. It's visions. He speaks with the Holy Guardian Angel, his Holy Guardian Angel, Ion. And it's very eerily similar to the experience of Crowley. The point is that Crowley at the time, we don't know if they two knew him, met ever or got in touch, but Crowley was living in that space, and he was trying to get a little bit of that. So in Magic Enduring Practice and in general in everything that you can find that he published for the public, sorry about that, like the Equinox, he was really pushing this idea of what he would call the scientific Illuminism, which sounds very interesting, right? But at the end of the day, really, it's like, okay, I'm not going to tell you if this is real or not. You do the experiments, and you keep a diary of these experiments and see what happens, right? So, this is a long way to say that I cannot tell you if magic is real or not. What I can tell you is that if we set up the space and we evoke the demon Belial will come, and that will tell you something.
Well, it does feel like he was a product of his time, because moving towards this form of knowledge that requires an embodied way of experiencing the world, it requires intuition, was really a revolt against what was happening at the time in the early 18th century, the early 20th century, which was about the rise of scientific rationalism. Yeah. And it feels like you needed that alternative way in which to navigate the world. And we see it today. We are such slaves to scientific rationalism. We dismiss anything that's kind of weird or odd, or if we have precognitive dreams, we just go, that was kind of an odd dream, and yet things come to pass. We're so quick to dismiss things as purely through some rational idea of, it's just coincidence.
I really believe we are living in times of the religion of scientism, right? Okay. I would like to say something like very clear here. I love science. Vaccines works. COVID is real. This is important, right? It's always like, at least that's my position. But the point is it's also true that I really believe that in the last 40, 50 years, we start, putting the prophets of our next generation in asylums, because everything that, whenever somebody hears voices in the past, they would become prophets, they would become, magicians, it would be people that would actually be able to transliterate the liminal into the physical. And now we only know that it's just in your head, it's something that needs to be cured. Well, Crowley didn't go for that. Crowley actually said he definitely tried to present magic in a way that was more acceptable for the time. If you read the intro of Magic Enduring Practice, which I mentioned in the book that he really tries this big intro whereby this book is written for everybody, for the housewife, for the banker, for the pugilist, and then okay, this is going to be easy. And then the next 900 pages are incomprehensible unless you really understand who Babylon is, what is the Eucharist, etc., etc., etc. But he tried, because he was trying to present it in a scientific framework. But I think he also had some undeniable mystical experiences that he knew he could not make it. He could not make it go away, pretty much, right? And again, those were years where the scientism was not the dominant paradigm, and so there were still leeways for these pioneers to experiment. Really, once again, I want to go back to Jung. Like, Jung realized this, and knowing that he was trying to establish psychology as a respectable science, he literally hid away his red books and everything that was like visionary and magical and mystical up until like 50 years after he was dead. So but Crowley didn't do that. Crowley just said, no, I'm a magician. I'm the prophet of the Eon.
Well, it does feel like it's largely this personal practice for many people if they do engage with magic. It's an experiment, to use your word. It's an experiment with the self. But, and I'm interested just in the room, has anybody had experiences in their life, and they could be really small and seemingly insignificant, where they've felt perhaps this is an odd synchronicity. Yeah. Yeah, and we're so quick to dismiss those moments.
Yep.
And yet if we were to, say, embrace them and take them seriously, if we were to not be paranoid about them, but pronoid, if we were to look at it as not the universe plotting against us, but the universe trying to guide us and help us, I mean, isn't that such a nicer way in which to navigate the environment where we're constantly walking around in the 21st century feeling paranoid about something? If we could feel a little more pronoid, that the universe was on our side.
You know, I love the fact that you use pronoia, because pronoia or eudaimonia, if you want, is a way that you can understand the knowledge and conversation with Holy Guardian Angel. Now, for those of you who never heard this term, in Thelema, you have fundamentally three stages, okay? The first one, which is called, you know, it can be seen as neophyte or man of earth, it's when you just start. Like, if all of you tonight, all of you listening, you're man of earth, because you just decided to embark on this strange path, and it might end tonight, or it might, you know, like me, being cursed for it for the rest of your life. The second initiation, which requires a lot of effort, a lot of soul searching, a lot of working with magic, you know, buy the book, we'll tell you how to do it. It's the second stage is becoming an adept or a lover, and this is a moment whereby you discover that true will you mentioned at the beginning of this talk. Well, of course, it's a bit more complicated than that, but once you have that, you kind of dissolve paranoia, and you only feel, you know, the winds of pronoia in your sails, and that's I think that's very useful. I think that's something that, in times like this, where everything feels very shaky, having this kind of, I mean, think about it. Like I said, it's the lover, right? It's almost like you will be in love, and we all know what it's like to feel, you know, like starstruck, right? Imagine being starstruck with the universe, with life itself. Well, that's not too bad, especially when we have, I don't know, the nukes coming or something like that, right? In fact, Crowley also used to say that magic is the art of life itself. Like everything, like understanding life, living life, not having fear for death, accepting that death is the other side of life. We were born to die, as Lana Del Rey used to say, and that's true. Like that's the only that's the only thing we can be certain of. Like the moment we're born, we don't know what life will be. If we're in a good life, a bad life, happiness, sadness, rich, poor, but we will die. So we know it. It's why we're here. We're here to experience these life. So if we can do it with pronoia, if we can do it with this sort of almost like reckless, starstruck, approach, it's a better way of living it, and that's why magic is important.
We have that power. Maybe it's a magical power. Maybe you describe it as a magical power, but a power to choose the perspective through which we come to the world with. Yep. You know, wake up in the morning, you feel crummy, and you have a crummy day. Weird that. Or you wake up in the morning, you feel positive, and you have a great day. You know,
I would tell you,
we don't know what follows what, but
there's something that happened in the recent times as I would say, magical revivals are cyclical, right? In my life, I've seen two already. In the late 90s, early 2000s, and literally now, the last few years. And every time there's a magical revival, every time, events like this can be possible, thank you for being here, there's also another thing that comes around, and that thing is that we want to believe it's easy. Right, like you say, like we want to believe that we can just wake up in the morning and say you had a terrible week, like your boss is horrible, your relationship is crumbling, but we can just put a smile on. I think that's spiritual bypassing. I think we need, in fact, to engage with a series of practices that will almost like strip away our self-doubt, our delusions, and in order to find that center in us. I mean, once you do that, and again, it's not easy. If anybody has ever engaged with yoga practices, you realize that at first it's very hard, but maybe a year down the line, well, you can do asana very well, all the positions, right? And I was never able to do that. I mean, look at me. But the point is that you need that kind of dedication to the practices, to magic itself. It's not just like, I just want to feel good, because if you do that, I feel in fact that's almost counterintuitive. Like you're almost like going away from it, because you need to put yourself through. Alchemists would call it the athanor, which is this strange like furnace that it's perennial. It never stops, right? You have to go through the flames of the athanor in order to start the process, right? You can just see the athanor from there and say, yeah, that's a good athanor. How you doing? You can do that.
Well, that's the key, that word practice, to actually not just do something, but do it multiple times, to have the repetition of those moments. And it was interesting on reading your book to realize that Thelemic Magick, it's largely about breathing. And yet breathing is one of those things we just forget to be aware of in our daily life.
Absolutely.
Our breath affects our comportment in so many ways.
I mean, how many of you are not breathing right now? Everybody would say, oh no, I'm breathing because I'm alive. Well, think about every time you speak, right? Every time you speak, like now, right? It's almost like you don't breathe for a while. You get into apnea mode. And I want to believe that I always breathe. I don't do it all the time. But I really believe that, I have the proof of having done this practice for a while, that when you start with that simple thing, like putting your awareness to the breathing, putting your awareness to the posture, these little things are the absolute fundamentals of magic. And again, it's something you have to put your attention to, because we tend to forget. It almost like, if I can say this, life will do everything it can to make you forget that you have to put your attention to life. I don't know if it makes sense, but that's something that I notice, right? Like it's almost, and I don't want to go Matrix-like, but kind of they got the idea from that. The idea that, you live somewhere else. It's not the strange stuff you hear in this day. Oh no, you need to disconnect to the Matrix. No, it's not that. It's about, we tend to sleepwalk through life. We tend to sleepwalk to everything we do. Putting your attention to the basics, putting your attention to breathing right now. Let's breathe a lot. And out. Like, it's almost like you when you start doing it, and then you put all the other practices one after the other, you start to perceive yourself and your position into this game called life. I mean, the experience of incarnation in Sanskrit is literally game, lila. And so the idea is that, you see things in different ways. But I'll tell you, that's not all that magic there is. That's the beginning of it. There's other things you can do.
Well, it does feel like a magical practice, what it's really there to do is increase your sensuality, to heighten the things that we have as innate human beings, the things that we discount every single day, our ability to tune into something, or, we're not here for nothing. Human consciousness is around for something. Jesus Christ, it better be. And I mean, it feels like that is a message that is so important in an age of technology, a technological age whereby we devalue what it means to be human, because we believe that we can outsource whatever this human thing is to machines, robots, computers, or otherwise. And just knowing that the one thing that ChatGTP or some computer can't do is fucking breathe is the reason we'd want to preserve this magical thing called humanity.
You know that just today I read on the Times I don't know if you know, a few days ago there was this thing that went out, like, let's stop the AI experience.
Future Life Institute.
Exactly. Today, this guy called Jabrunski, he's got a strange name, Eliezer something, on the Times, is one of the guys that's been at the forefront of AI since the 2000s. He said something that actually made me think, and the thing he said, we shouldn't stop it for 6 months. We should just stop. Because what we're creating is an intelligence that is few steps away from being superhuman. And the moment it does that, it can email DNA samples to a lab that can create, I don't know, like a body out of it, and then we're done. This is not dissimilar to what you find, all these ideas of being aware of who you're going to call. Like, in magic, you can call whatever you want. Like you said, we have human consciousness, but there's other consciousness out there. I mean, there's animal consciousness, right? But is there what I call ultra-terrestrial consciousness? We are consciousness that aggregates around bodies, right? We're physical, and our consciousness, which is somewhere, it just aggregates around this flesh and bones. But we're not alone, right? There's something else out there. And what's happening right there is that possibly we are creating something, and I know we're really going places here, but we're creating something that possibly doesn't really care about life. I know you're interested in futures and all of that. So what do you think about that?
So what made that so palatable to me was the neuroscientist David Eagleman. So David Eagleman has written multiple things about the human brain, and the one thing that he's always written is we don't really know what consciousness is or where consciousness sits. And he has this beautiful metaphor about prehistoric man finding a radio, an old style FM radio, and they pick up the radio and they shake the radio and they open up the back of the radio, they mess with the batteries, mess with the wires in the radio, and the voices in the radio change. So prehistoric man looks at the radio and thinks the things that I'm doing to that radio is the reason the voices change. They're not realizing that what they're actually doing is tuning the radio, that it's tuning into differentiated frequencies. And Eagleman, who is, for want of a better, he's a hardcore neuroscientist, it goes, look, we've got all these scans of the brain, but we don't know whether memory or consciousness is stored in the 3 pounds of gray gloop. And if it was stored in the 3 pounds of gray gloop, the processing power needed to actually run this thing called consciousness is so crazy that your brain would explode. So perhaps the human brain is not a computer, it's not a storage device, but maybe it's more like an antenna. Maybe it's tuning into something that's out there, a collective consciousness. And he goes further, he talks about memory. So, for example, the memory of when you walked into Temperance today. That is such a visceral and clear memory for so many people. And to say that it's a stored memory, one that exists somewhere amongst the neurons, is kind of hard to admit. But the idea that you can actually tune in to that moment, not in time, but in space, i.e. the moment of you walking into Temperance is happening simultaneously right now, and all that memory is our ability to tune into moments in space, not times. Time being the subjective reality that we are experiencing right now, the belief that we exist in the present and that the future hasn't been created and the past is going to be destroyed. I mean, you're seeing already in scientific discovery that B theory of time and block theory of the universe suggests that every event is happening simultaneously right now, and whatever consciousness is the ability to sit across it. So in that domain, in that hard scientific domain that combines neuroscience with quantum theory, it opens up the possibility for magic, for what we are experiencing as intuitive beings, as something that is not just ephemeral but material.
I mean, you literally described the adept view of magic, of reality, sorry. Like the fact that, like we exist as a vector, right? Like the adept see the world, like the adept, and by that I mean, the person, the magician, who went through all the various steps, remember to breathe, doing all the strange rituals or other rituals that I write in the book or other books. And then at some point, boom, you have that moment of gnosis where you see yourself in that state of eudaimonia we discussed before, right? That moment, it's almost like you exist outside of time, because you realize that you exist as a vector, right? You're a spark of consciousness that moves into time and space. But the reality there is that you're not that. You're something else entirely. You almost like look at that from above, right? And being able to get to that point and having gnosis of it, like being absolutely certain of having had that moment, is a huge mystical moment, of course. It's what in Sanskrit would be called samadhi, union with the divine, okay? The final steps of yoga, the final limb of yoga. Well, the point is that is literally what magic is supposed to. And we start by what we were saying before, learning about breathe, because we're talking about breathing, right? Which is important, but in the book I describe it as prana, which is again this Sanskrit term, and I'm being completely appropriating it. But the point is that it just sounds good. I mean, it's the same term that Crowley uses, and the idea is that it's just a little bit more than breathing. It's not just like oxygen and CO2 and all those kind of chemical compounds, because those exist here. Chemical processes happen through space and time, but there's an there's an ontological reality behind it that is something that binds us and can let us live outside of space and time. We're going places here. You just joined for it. I'm sorry.
Well, there is a thing about, I mean, breathing can get you high. It's a free ride.
Absolutely.
You know, there are practices, and you outline some in the book, that recenter you inside of your body.
Yeah.
You suddenly realize, oh, I'm not just a brain that's got this transportation network that happens to be the body. The body is actually kind of important to how the brain feels.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, as long as we have this body, we need to make sense of it. Can we move beyond that? Possibly, but that's maybe for the second book. The third book.
But back to those moments of pronoia. So there was a moment this week where this event was plagued by train strikes. So you had friends, and I had friends who wanted to travel from Birmingham or from London to see this. And I remember the minute and you had to get here from London as well. And the minute the trains were cancelled, I emailed you and went, "Magic's fucking real." You know.
And I said, yeah, well.
Yeah. But again, it's a choice. But I wonder, are there, and you don't have to share, but are there moments in your life that have really viscerally set with you that have made you go, that is just too weird to be a coincidence?
How much time do you have? Yes, absolutely. I wouldn't have dedicated my life to this if I didn't have experiences, right? And I'm fully aware that I cannot explain them scientifically, right? And I'm talking about, seeing what we would call demons and angels, talking to them, or seeing myself through, through the space-time continuum. Like seeing myself being born, seeing myself dying, right? And then realizing that person is a mask of a higher consciousness, right? That just decides at some point to come in here and take the mask of Marco, the mask of Luke, etc., etc. Hold your masks, right? There's also an implication to this, and I don't know if we want to go there, but the idea is that, maybe reincarnation is real, but you only get one life, because you only get to be Marco once. You only go back to be the boss, and then the boss comes back as Luke, comes back as Christina, comes back as whoever, right? So that's, again, why Crowley insisted that you got to make this life work. I mean, all his constant, look for hedonism and sensuality was because, and this is something that's very important in Thelema. Like, you have to live beautifully, you have to live greatly, you have to experience everything, because you got one life, but you also reincarnate. The problem is that you are not you. You are what we call God, okay? That comes, God maybe is loaded. Let's call it consciousness, right? Which, by the way, we're going back to the idea. Are we creating a new consciousness? Then maybe
we're borrowing it.
Okay.
Are we borrowing it? Are we borrowing it from a collective consciousness? If you take what Jung was saying seriously, if we are tuning into something, we're all borrowing it for a short period of time.
That is true. Yeah.
Part of the reasons for the way in which modern society has been created is we all assumed it's the I. My consciousness emerged from my brain. This one free miracle that Terence McKenna was talking about. Pop! Okay, there I am. Look at me. That brain is incredible, but maybe it is something that exists out of us, and we should take special care of it if it is online.
Yeah, I agree. Sadly, we don't have anything to show. There's a meme that goes around, which is beautiful. You see like a lot of blackness, and then this blackness puts in front of it a mask, and from the mask you see, I don't know, in the meme there's like a garden. That's about it, right? This is exactly what's happening right now. Once again, you see it when you think about it, because you can never pinpoint yourself in time, right? Like you were saying before, you can think of your past and you can think what the future will be, but even now, like, where are we? Are we here, or are we before? Like when we were, when we just walk into Temperance, are we at the pub afterwards? Are we on our deathbed right now? Are we being born right now? I mean, this is magic. Like, this is what magic should give you. This is the experience magic. And so when you're asking me, like, did you have experiences like this? Yes. And I would say that if you engage with magic and never have these experiences, there are two reasons. First reason, possibly you've been thought badly, and so, or you didn't put all the, you didn't go through all the steps. You were too quick to try and go through all the steps. So you think, I don't need to do all this boring parts. Like, I can go to and call demons immediately, or you haven't got there yet. You have to to put some more work in. I also realized that, this idea that I also put in the book a lot, the idea that, in order to have experience, you have to put the work in. I get it from my own experiences, and my own experience were formed by reading Crowley. And Crowley was, like I said, exclusive brethren. He really had this almost Calvinist approach to magic. Like we have to work a lot to get things done. A lot of my friends think about Phil Hine, very famous chaos magician. He hate me now that I call him a chaos magician. He's much more interested in writing about Tantra in this day. He completely disagree with that. Like, you don't need to put any work. You just have to have the experience, right? And this is also very different from what you find in African diaspora traditions. Like I'm thinking voodoo or Lukumi, Santeria. There's no work there. Like you just go to the peristyle, to the Umfor, and you just, chant to the luas, and they come and they ride you, and you have the experience. There's no one way fits all to have this experience. But when we speak about magic with decay is this. Like there's a series of steps, and if you go to all the steps, you will have the experience. If you're lazy, you won't have it.
Well, there's different strokes for different folks, and what works for you. It doesn't have to work for everybody else. It doesn't have to be thrust down their throat. But I do want to return to some of those principles of Thelemic Magick. Man, I got to learn how to say half of this stuff. Because there is the phrase that everybody reads when they first encounter Aleister Crowley, which is, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And that doesn't mean what most people hope it means when they first read it, which is do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And you can get away with it, providing you think you're a magician.
I was one of them.
So what does it actually mean?
So, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. It's one of the three main aphorisms of Thelema. The other two, and I think I'm going to tell you because they kind of work together. The other two are, of course, love is the law, love on the will. And the third one is every man and every woman is a star. Now, back to the first one. This means that the law, that is the experience of incarnated life, in order to do it right, you have to do your will. But doing your will, it means like knowing who you truly are, right? So you cannot begin with true will. You cannot begin with will. It's something that we are not born with the knowledge of our true will. Maybe some will be facilitated to that. Magic really is akin to being a musician, playing guitar, okay? Everybody can play guitar, and if you put a lot of hours in, you'll be a great guitarist, right? But it's undeniable that some people will be talented, and some people will. I mean, I've been a guitarist for 30 years. I still cannot sweep pick to save my life. I'm really bad at that. I mean, but then I put a lot of hours in, and I can play Megadeth, which is kind of difficult, to be fair. But the point being is that. I remember my first guitar player, which was a guy who was 5 years younger than me. I was 18, the guy was like 13, and he could sweep pick like a motherfucker. And I was like, wow. Because there is some talent about it. It's undeniable. But at the same time, magic is the birthright of humanity. Discovering your true will is the birthright of humanity. Everybody can discover it. This also means that it's a process of transformation, right? I use the term alchemy a lot. I think that alchemy and magic with kind of the same thing, really. It means that everything you think your will is at the beginning of your process, it's not. It's absolutely not. I remember, when I had my moment with true will, I did a very complex, long ritual called the Abramelin ritual. And it was like in the summer of 99. It was like before going to university. At the time, I didn't have to pay anything. I was like, I'm going to do it in 6 months. I'm going to be a magician. And something did happen there. And believe it or not, at the time, I was like completely I spent my teenage year listening to metal, listening to goth, but being, no tattoos, no piercings, nothing. I'm gonna be very square. I come from an upper middle class family, so it's like I'm gonna be very good guy. And then I got this experience in '99, and lo and behold, the next time I had a mohawk, piercings everywhere. I don't have piercings anywhere. I was full of piercing in my face. Tattoos, you can still see some of them. And I've been a goth musician for 15 years after that because I found one thing that, I found the vector of my life there. And that vector will change. It's not something, it's a moment where you discover that true will, but that will also change in time because it is a vector. It's something that pushes you through the experience of space-time, of life, incarnated life. So it's not do whatever you want, right? It's I've seen people going through the experiences, and you can always tell when people fake it, because if you find these people that, especially at the very beginning, say, hey, I want to do this because I want to become a banker, make a lot of money, and maybe they become a banker and do a lot of money, and they're fucking miserable. It's like, well, that wasn't your true will. So you cannot, in my experience, you cannot have this experience and be miserable. That doesn't mean that your life will always be easy. Remember, like the idea of paranoia and paranoia, right? Your life is life. Life will put you through all sorts of ordeals, but it's the way you approach to those ordeals that change if you know your true will or not. So, long story short, it's not doing whatever you want. And you do not start with that, and you have to do all the exercises in the book, by the book, to have a general idea of what. I'm terrible at doing this thing. Let's stop. Yeah, that's it.
So it's ultimately it's an approach, it's a style, it's more of a vibe. But do you need that vector moment to discover your one true will, or is it about this exercise process, this practice?
I think that there is. Okay, if you want to do it as Crowley, laid out, right? So if you want to use magic with the K, there's all these exercises that you do in order to go through stages. And I do speak about this in the book. You start with being aware of your center, breathing, posture, etc. Then you realize that you're made of what we will call the hermetic elements, fire, water, earth, and air, which are really earth. Earth is your body, air is your thoughts, fire is your passions, your creativity, and water is your feelings, your emotions. Then you want to establish yourself at the center of this cross and make sense of it, right? Start to balance it. That's only the beginning. Then you realize that there's other layers, and traditionally these layers have been seen as the planetary influences, and then there's a zodiacal influences. Sorry about my English, but I never know. It's zodiacal. I don't know. I'm Italian, and then you go through the stages to the point whereby you almost create a perfect vessel for this vector moment to happen. Once you have created this perfect vessel and you put this vessel, on the fire of the atom or of transformation, the moment is where this vessel gets filled. And this filling is what we call the Holy Guardian Angel. The Holy Guardian Angel really is a fancy name. Crowley really wrote, I'm going to use Holy Guardian Angel because it's such a stupid name. Nobody will put any stock in it. Lo and behold, everybody thinks that the Holy Guardian Angel is Archangel Michael or Lilith or Batman. It's God. It's the divine. It's that it's consciousness. You can call it consciousness. Absolutely fine with that. And that moment when consciousness finally feels it, and you feel that you're just a mask, but you feel almost like the face pressing on the mask, that is the moment where then you know what your true will is.
Yeah, this word practice is not just a bunch of practices, but doing it over and over again. I mean, the fact that it's hard. Sorry, it's going to be difficult if you want to engage with some of this stuff. But doing difficult things is something we seem to be so averse to in the 21st century. When it comes to thinking about breathing, or just sitting and not staring at a shiny glowing rectangle, or just standing. I mean, these things have become more difficult. When we do engage with them, it does feel like a superpower.
I don't know if you've ever been to any sort of spiritual retreat of any kind.
The
Right?
Vipassana meditation for the 10 days of silent meditation, that will freak you the fuck
Exactly.
out. You realize you really do talk to yourself. By the end of the 6th day, you think you are conversing with an alien called Lamb, because your voice in the head is so loud because you can't stare at a shiny glowing rectangle or get away from those feelings of craving or aversion to certain feelings. You have to sit with it, man.
And the reality there is that it's always been difficult, right? Now we have, of course, the shiny triangles, right? And humanity's attention has always been fought for by the external world, right? I do believe we live in times where, maybe there's too much of that. We weren't ready for the social media revolution. We weren't ready to, process all this information all at once. But if you read Crowley, if you read Paracelsus, 500 years before Crowley, they all say everybody's lazy, everybody is doing other things as opposed of staying with. Because as you said,
it's kind of scary when the voice inside of you starts to talk back. And again, we live in times where if you speak out, maybe you're gonna get pills for that, and in order to silence it. Now, the trick is when the voice starts to talk back, well, magic does give you tools, and these tools is the idea of externalize it. You remember when I was speaking about angels, demons, spirits?
Philip K. Dick thought he was conversing with aliens.
Yeah,
Robert Anton Wilson, it was serious aliens.
Yeah, of course,
and
absolutely.
serious. There's a lot of other artists, and I'm not going to out them, artists and musicians who thought that their inspiration, divine inspiration, came from elsewhere.
Absolutely. I think that that's always there. The ultra-terrestrial is always there. One thing that magic can help, and this is a more advanced thing, I don't speak about this in the book because it's more advanced. You can give it a form, right? You can give it a form, and that's the moment where you go and evoke angels and demons, or the genius loci, the spirit of the place, or aliens, right? I mean, what are aliens? Aliens are consciousness, right? Like if you look at the history of folklore of fairy, and then you see, okay, the encounter of the fairy happens, I don't know, in somewhere, and you get spirited away, and you come back, and a lot of time has passed. Oh, look at that. It's the same story of being abducted by a UFO. Possibly, there is this consciousness out there, which is not our consciousness, it's something else that from time to time was pushed to talk to us. Well, magic can give you the tools to give it a form. And so instead of talking with the voice in yourself, it can be scary. You can give it out, something external. I mentioned before the psychological model of magic, which was something was very popular in the 80s and 90s. The idea that it's all in our head. We just don't know how big our head is. This is a phrase from Milo Duquette, fantastic author. And people really thought of it as that's the poster boy of the psychological model. Well, the reality there is that we don't, as you say, like we don't know if it's just us or something else. What's useful is to bring it out and have a conversation with it, because again, whenever you one moment that I've seen a lot of people that attempted magic, did all the various steps and got to the point where they could evoke something. When you realize that you don't see anything, but you're not in the room alone anymore.
Oh, fuck no, I'm out.
I love it. What do you mean? I have a lot of friends at home. You don't see them.
but for some people,
there's a lot of friends here, by the way.
But for some people, that is the moment where you're like truly questioning reality. That's when you step away and you go, you know what, I'm okay.
Well, that's the moment where I doubled down. Actually, yeah. No, I think that we're also fighting. What I would say, like 2,000 years of monotheistic religion conditioning, right? The idea that we are not good enough to talk to God, because God is so away from us and so better than us and so divine, and we should always have a cast of priests that talk to God for us, or whenever we see it, we should fear God. You should love God because you are God. I mean, that's the reality of that. So the moment whereby you call a spirit and the spirit talk, how can you be afraid of it? It's either it's part of you, or it's something that wants to talk to you. Imagine that like you meet me in like today when we first met, right? You didn't know who I was, right? You never saw me in the flesh before. Imagine that you say hi and you say, hi, fuck you. What do you want? I mean, would you want to do that to spirits? Why no? Why? Instead, the much better approach is that, first of all, if you get to that stage, you kind of wanted to go there. There are some exceptions. Maybe we're going to talk about that now. But then, when you have the answer, when the specs back, invite them, talk to them. It's also true that from time to time, these things can happen on their own, right? This is where one of my teachers, this guy called Michael Bertio, in the United States, he wrote a lot of strange things, and he wrote something called the bad UFO versus the good UFO experience. And he insists on the idea that a lot of people have traumatic experience of in contacting with the other. It's because they weren't ready for it, right? So it happened because at some point this other consciousness presented itself into their space and into their body, physical space and mental space, and they were not ready for it, and they saw it as traumatic, invasive, etc., etc. But if you
use tools that have been there forever. And again, magic is just one. You can do meditation. You can do various kinds of, animist practice, religion practices, but like positive religious practices, as opposed of, if you don't go to church, God is going to hate you, right? Well, it means that whenever the other presents to you, maybe you will still be like shocked, but you will not feel threatened by it. You will not feel overwhelmed by it. I will be honest with you all. This is my experience. I've seen it happen to me. I've seen it happen to others. A lot of people don't agree with me. One is the guy who wrote the foreword of my book, Peter Levenda. Peter Levenda is a very good friend, fantastic author. He has the view that it's not just all happiness out there. Consciousness can be malicious. And he's very involved in the UFO community. He's writing books with Tom DeLonge and To the Stars Academy. And he kind of believed that, there might be evil, I don't know, like strange. But then again, like you were saying before, if everybody can have their own opinion. It's not my experience, though. Maybe I've been lucky.
Was where the metaphysical becomes a material. So when you're talking about aliens, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you're not talking about little green men, you're just talking about experiences that you can't necessarily explain, of conversing with something that may have the image and likeness of what we traditionally conceive to be little green men or little rays.
Also the reality there is that there's a lot of discussion going on in those parts of spirituality, like, are the aliens little green men that come here with spaceship, or is consciousness that takes form? The reality is that, as usual, we don't know. The answer is always we don't know, because this is not stuff that can be, for the moment, it cannot be quantized in any way. Yeah. It could be both, right? It could be little green man, or it could be consciousness coming down.
But then it feels like the game is to stay agnostic. It could be something, it could be nothing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the ability to live in that ambiguity is the power, or the superpower that you need, that you can access through practices. Yeah. Practices.
You mentioned liminality. Liminal spaces are so popular right now, but it is true. It's always been the liminal spaces have always been like the ecology of the shaman, right? The one that lives between the civilized world and the wilderness, and he acts as a vector again between what's out there and what's here. And usually, to become a shaman, you have to go through a lot of work. You have to have a lot of soul searching, a lot of different. Shamans actually put themselves in harm's way and try all the way for the wilderness to kill them. And so, if they survived, they would be okay. They could speak with spirits. But this is it. Like the magician lives in the liminal. The magician in the tarot, it is something I like to say all the time because it's good. The magician on the tarot, another word for it, the original word for it is le battleur. And le battleur is the juggler. And the juggler really, what does he juggle? He juggles reality itself. He juggles everything that can be and everything that cannot be. He doesn't think about it too much. He doesn't care about it, but he keeps going. He keeps throwing things in the air so that that game, that lila of life can keep going. I don't make sense.
That makes weirdly enough, that makes complete sense. We're all going to turn you into jugglers. So there's no card tricks, but everybody gets 3 balls, and let's see how you get on. But those balls represent reality. I want to bring it back to terrestrial before we end too much up there with the aliens. I want to bring it back to terrestrial reality. Do you think to some degree magical practice is a reconnection with nature? We feel as human beings so alienated from the environment that we are part of. We see human beings as something separate from nature. We don't see it as part of nature. And through engaging in these practices, do you think there can be a heightened awareness of the way in which we have a relational experience with things like nature? I say things. Thing is a loaded word as well. But
no, I agree with you 100%. Absolutely. Magic will put you in the center of your own universe. And by that, it means like you will have the ability to recognize the universe for what it is. And so the fact that, there is an ecology of souls out there, which exists both in the physical and in the spiritual, but the physical should never be forgotten. And so the idea of like becoming more aware of the fact that we're killing the earth, for instance, or the fact that, living in cities has a lot of great things. I'm a city boy. I tried to live in Glastonbury for a year. It failed miserably. But the point is that at the same time, going away from cities and understanding that life exists in in what we call nature, right? Literally, it's fundamental. If magic doesn't give you a heightened understanding of your surroundings, and maybe doesn't force you from time to time, literally, to live your concrete block behind and go back for just a walk in the park helps, right? That it doesn't have to be I'm gonna go on a trek on K2 like Crowley did, but it's like it's undeniable that magic does enable that connection. And of course, we've seen how that is also a way that humanity likes that, because if one of the things that one of the most successful magical expressions of the last 20, 40 years is nature religions. I'm thinking about, Wicca, witchcraft, right? You wouldn't believe how many people I know that struggle with magic, but they will have, I don't know, a full moon ritual, because I feel like everybody feel that connection with nature, and then it's almost like magic is it's a bit too much for some of them, but they cannot deny the fact that they started something, they called for something, and that something answered, and the first time you find it is in the streams, is in the forest, is in the flowers. And I'm sounding like a hippie here, but hey, it's true.
Well, I mean, those things were there before the things that we built.
Absolutely.
I mean, the moon mine stuff, I mean, it works, but I don't know why it works. If I try and work on new moons, it's a pain in the ass. But full moons, I'm rocking and rolling. And I don't know whether it's neurotransmitters in the brain being affected by the moon, or if it's just the fact that because I'm not killing myself on the new moons trying to work, that on the
or maybe it's
on
all,
the full
it's all
moons
these things
that
at
I'm
once,
more
right?
productive, or it's all the things at once.
I think if we have to have an answer, it's a cop out, right? But hey, a lot of magic is a cop out, because a lot of magic exists outside our overthinking. Like as humans, we want to put things into neat little boxes, right? But magic forces you to smash those boxes. And then it could be useful to bring them back. Once again, in the book, the first 2 chapters is me telling you that you must memorize 20 pages of correspondences. Yeah, nobody's going to do that. I tried. Come on. But the point is that those are the little boxes, right? You start from that because it's something you can understand. Almost like secret. I try to convince you that you can put things in boxes, and then by the second half of the book, it's like, well, that doesn't matter. But it is the human nature of trying to box everything. But then you realize that I can't. I mean,
So apart from just read the book, what advice would you give to either someone who's a complete beginner or someone who might be scared of their innate magical abilities?
First of all, don't be scared. Second of all, from what we just said, maybe take some week. Okay, take a weekend off, right? Take a weekend off if it's possible in this economy. Take a weekend off and go to the countryside. And again, this completely betrays the fact that I live in London, but it's like, go to the countryside. And by that I mean, like, go somewhere where you can walk into the forest without losing yourself. I mean, you got your OS Maps and Google Maps these days. And just walk for the forest, into the woods for a couple of hours, right? And just but while you walk, just try to, okay, of course, breathe, like be present in the moment, and try to see if anything around you catch your attention. It could be a tree, it could be a stream, it could be the sound of birds, it could be anything. Because see if something speaks to you. Now, this could be your first step to accepting that, that consciousness we discussed before doesn't begin and ends with us, but it's all over us, and then by the book. Oh, I did it again. God damn it. Terrible.
Yeah, I've heard something similar, which is just get a good night's sleep. Either get into nature or get a good night's sleep, because your dreams are always way more fascinating than the latest thing on Netflix.
I mean, do you dream often?
So part of the reason I'm so interested...
Don't tell us what you dream.
All right. But, I mean, that's a big part. So precognitive dreaming is something that I've always had and always dismissed. I'm rational in many ways when I'm not doing this sort of thing. It's Science, Technology, Futures podcast. And I've had precognitive dreams that have been so visceral that they're not nothing.
Yeah.
So to be fair to the audience, the one that's always the one that I regret not. The one that I regret not writing down or holding in time was I had this dream of my father holding my grandfather who's bleeding from the head, and I woke up bolt upright, and the person I was with at the time was like, "Oh, you okay?" And I shouted my grandfather's name, Cliff, and the person I was with was like, "Are you okay?" I go, "I've just had this really weird dream. It's my father holding my grandfather. My grandfather's bleeding from the head. I should call my mother." And she goes, no, don't do that. It's 4 a.m.
Yeah.
You're going to freak her out. I wake up at 8 a.m. the next day. I get a phone call from my mother. "Oh, Luke, just want to let you know that your grandfather is currently in hospital. He was found at 4 a.m. He was taking he had bowel cancer. He was taking drugs for that. They were sending him doulali. He went for a walk in the local village, tripped, fell over, slapped his head on the side of a curb. Luckily, my mother at the time had sewn her name and phone number into all of his clothes, and my mother was calling me to say, he's found by a taxi driver at 4 a.m. And I've had so many cases of that where it's like, write down your dreams, people, because you never know what's going to come to pass. Now, I regret not calling my fucking mother.
Well, the thing is, right, I ask you that question because it means you dream, right? There's a lot of people that don't dream very often.
Okay.
I don't dream very often, for instance.
It's all the breathing you're doing. That's probably why.
You don't want to go there. But it's also that what I'm saying is that, each one of us will have our peculiar way, our entryways into this strange world. And I'll tell you, you mentioned the fact that, you have these precognitive dreams, but you never act upon them, right? In many ways, that, to me, it's always been like a lesson, in the sense that that's not the point. It's not about having magical powers. When we look back to the East, right, which is, once again, one of the sources of Crowley's magic with a K, there's this idea that the more you engage with tantric practices, with yogic practices, the more you will develop what they call siddhis, which is powers, all kind of powers. The caveat is that the more siddhis you have, the farther away you are from samadhi, from enlightenment, from that moment of, recognize who you are. Because imagine that you start to believe your dreams. I don't know, you act upon them, right? Imagine how that will gonna fuck your life up. Because imagine that you start dreaming all about bad things, or you start dreaming about the end of the world. It's almost like the magical powers that happen like this. It means that, in my experience, that maybe something is moving around you, but the trick is that leave them behind. Don't worry about them, because it's not about that. It's not about having magical powers.
No, you're right. It's being equanimous to those moments. So acknowledging those moments, respecting those moments,
correct,
being aware of those moments, memorizing those moments, telling those moments to a group of people you never met before, but being equanimous about them, not getting arrogant to think.
Maybe write the diary, right? Write the diary, because make sense of it.
Yeah, but I want to ask you about that before we go out to audience questions. So think of a question. If do have a burning question. Hey, my alien friend, what do I?
I can answer that.
but I want to ask you about that process of writing, because I've always found the modern occult books with Phil Hine or David Conway, like these books are so easily written, and I mean that in a way in which is like you can actually grok what they're saying. You can follow along, and they're not designed to be alienating in many ways. And do you think there's a magical practice to writing? I mean, language, that spelling is within language. But do you think, one, do you see the book as a hyper sigil, and two, do you think there is an art and magic to that process of externalizing thoughts and putting them in other medium like a book like this?
Well, in the introduction of the book, I share with everybody a secret, and that is that I hate writing. I really don't like it. So for me, finding my voice I mean, a lot of people say that the book is very clear, it's very easy to follow, and it almost like removes a lot of normic illusions that you find in Crowley and in Thelema in general. For me, the key to that was not writing it as a book. All that was actually came out of the direct experience I had as a magical teacher online during COVID, right? I never had the idea of putting everything in a book, right? I was writing it for a group of people. We started with 12. 2 of them are here. Hello. We started with 12. We ended up with almost 300 people at the height of the pandemic. And then now we're around 200 or something like that. And it was just people trying to make sense of the end times. And we were all stuck, in front of computers. Zoom was a thing. Okay. And so I was trying to speak my experience, right? So if you ask me a question, is there a method to the madness? Well, for me, the method was don't think about the book. Don't have, in many ways, I mean, this is something that maybe Crowley can come along as well, because another thing that Crowley really insisted on is that in order for magic to work, you must not have lust of result. That is, you need to do it for the sake of doing it. You don't have to do it because something will happen. And that's how the book came together. Like, by the end, by the time Watkins contacted me, I was like, well, do you have a book? It's like, oh, look at that. I almost have 300 pages written. So that's, I think, how the book became something that's clear, right? Also, I mean, if I can be very, down to earth, I mean, you'll notice that English is not my mother tongue, right? So for me, writing in English was really like, okay, I need to try and make it very clear, right? So I guess that's, the idea really is the spell is about not thinking it. It's about doing it. It's about it is wu wei, right? This term about just doing, it's Zen in a way, like doing the thing for the sake of doing the thing. Will a book come out of it? I don't know. Do I care? I don't know. Am I gonna get paid? I can tell you, not much. But it's like I don't care at the same time. It's about putting the magic in the word. That's what matters. And I think that, Conway, definitely feel, I'm thinking about David Southwell as well, I'm thinking Peter Lavanda. It's all great writers of magic that all did this. And I think Crowley was like this as well. Remember that we think of Crowley being very difficult to understand because it's almost like we're reading our proto-boomer grandfather writing, right? It's like, I mean, the man died 30 years before I was born. Yeah, exact. So, of course, it was, his prose doesn't make sense to us, but at the time it did. And at the time, he was able to, he didn't care about making money. He didn't care about, leaving a legacy. He only cared about, I think, at least, to just give this tool to the world. And that is the spell in itself. It's the spell of creation. Abracadabra.
Well, we're gonna cast some more spells from audience questions, and I'm gonna warn you: a question is a thing that ends in a question mark. You're more than welcome to make statements to our author afterwards in the bar. If you buy him a drink, you can make a long statement and buy him 2 drinks. But if there are any burning questions, I'd love to have a couple of minutes of those.
Can I ask?
Oh, sorry. Just here first, and then I'll come to you.
I read a book recently called Girls Against God, and one thing that she's saying in it is that she finds that in her magic, in her love of black metal and everything else, it's kind of spitting in the face of God. She wants to reject God. And Crowley obviously came from a very religious background. How would you respond to the idea that magic is an attempt to spit in the face of God and to assert human significance, to say that I matter and I am God, in a need to kind of assert some sort of significance that we might not otherwise have?
That was the reason why I started doing magic myself, right? Like, I was born in Rome, and I was baptized by Pope John Paul II. You can imagine what family I come from, and I was like, yeah, that's not gonna be me. So when I was 12 in 1990, I discovered Crowley, and I was like, oh, look at this guy. He did that. I'm gonna do that as well. So I think that is this is a very good way. It's a very good first impetus. Okay, like let's say. But again, think about that as well. Like, which God are we really talking about? We're not talking about the God we talk about tonight, consciousness, the divine. We're talking about a specific version of it, which maybe comes not so much from Jesus, but from the people who came after him, that created the religion and the Vatican, and what Philip K. Dick would call the empire, right? This idea, this oppressive idea that puts you away from the center of creation and become just. So in many ways, the antinomian approach of spitting in front of God, I mean, let's fucking do it all the time. But that's the beginning. Like, I think that if you start If you start your magical practice like that, that's fine. If 5 years into your magical practice, you're still there, I think you haven't grown much. And, right now, I can tell you, I don't hate God. I am God. That sounds interesting.
Well, we all are, so don't get arrogant. There's a question just there.
Can I ask, what does your meditation practice look like, and how does it interact with magic?
So most of my practices at this point is what would you call shunyata meditation, so meditating on void, on the absence of everything. Because Thelema is a non-dual practice. It is not immediately obvious. It's very well hidden, in plain sight, right? It's something that I mentioned briefly in the book, but it's really something that you realize as you go deeper into practices and you move from magical practices, which is, again, a way of making sense of this incarnated experience, into having a glimpse of true reality, of ontological reality. And in Thelema, ontological reality is something that's called nuit, which is the infinite expansive potentiality of consciousness. And that is the zero. It's not the one, it's the zero. And it's interesting because it's a bit more complex than this, in fact. But back to your question, and so I don't derail too much, because as you can imagine, I can derail a lot. The idea is that right now, my meditation practice is non-dual, sunyata style meditation, like meditating on the nothing, but not in a nihilistic way, like I don't exist, I should die. It's more about I'm here, but I aspire to be the absolute zero. Well, and the absolute zero is the reconciliation of all polarities, like starting from good and bad, hot and cold, me and you, life and death. The reconciliation of that point of nothingness is true reality. So that's fun times.
Any other questions at all?
Kind of killed it. Look at that.
Just here.
Castaneda, it seems to me that there's strong parallels between what Crowley's saying and what Castaneda says. For instance, will and intent seem to be very much the same thing. I feel that this possibly points towards a sort of kind of universal magical grammar, which the various traditions all discover and map into. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I think that's absolutely true. I don't think Castaneda ever, I don't think Don Juan ever existed. I think Castaneda was a bit of he created good stories, right? But the point is that the myth is valid, and myth, it's something, doesn't matter if it's true, it's true somewhere else, right? So if you ask me, is there a perennial gnosis? Is there something that all these various traditions are, again, masks of? I think so, yes. I think that every master, every advanced, enlightened, awakened person goes back to the center of that wheel, but that wheel has infinite spokes, and you can get to the center in infinite ways, right? And by the way, you'll need to work. It's not easy. But yeah, to sum it up, yes, I believe that they were saying the same thing. I also believe maybe Castaneda was inspired by Crowley. We have quite some evidence that he might have been familiar with him, and so quite possible. But then again, Crowley's visions and Crowley's realizations are, we had other people coming before him. If you look, Miguel Molinos, which was a Christian mystic, Miguel Molinos speaks of something very similar. In fact, in one of the Crowley's magical orders, the AA, the Argentum Astrum or Astronargon, Miguel Molinos is one of those you have to read in order to go further. There is one truth, and there is infinite ways to get to that.
Possibly time for one more question. Yes, just here. No,
it was.
Yeah.
Well, this is my first foray into Aleister Crowley, and when you mentioned then that you tried to get back to death, are you trying to get back to before your life here, but when you were in another life? Is that what you mean?
No.
Sorry.
I mean that I exist only in life, right? Marco Visconti, it's something that exists only through life. And life is a vector of space and time, okay? Incarnated experience. Death is the other side of the experience. And through death, we all go back to the source. So the idea is that we all reincarnate because there's only one consciousness that reincarnates all the time, which is God. This is the same idea of the interplay between Shiva and Shakti. There's only one perspective, and the perspective is that of Shiva. All of us are Shiva, or in Thelemic terms, Hadith, coming back again and again into this life. And of course, being a godlike consciousness, it can come at all the time in many different ways. But the reality there is that whenever we incarnate, we have that life as Marco, as Luke, as Andrew, and then when it's over, it's over. But the thing is that for instance, like somebody once asked me, well, how do you reconcile the fact that I remember my previous lives, or Crowley remembered his previous lives? Well, what is remembering, right? You remember surely when you were born, but where is that person? Where is that you as a little child? So what we remember as previous lives are something else remembering another life, which they experienced as, I don't know, Cleopatra or Julius Caesar. By the way, so many Cleopatras out there. So I mean So I hope that answered the question. I'm very bad at trying to explain mystical stuff because I don't understand them very well myself. I'm trying.
Did you see one more question?
She had a question.
Please.
Do you think we could be on the edge of, like, collectively as a species, on the edge of, like, greater awareness of this kind of thing?
You should ask that to an optimist. I'm not. I think that it's undeniable that there has been almost like great
resurgence.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And but I also think this is cyclical. This happens in time because, once again, the experience of incarnated life is cyclical because this God, this consciousness, likes to play this game and comes back and again and again. So possibly we're definitely more. We're talking about this. Like, again, look where we are tonight. This place is full. Thank you for showing up, by the way. And it's like, it's amazing we can have this. This wasn't possible 20 years ago, right? It's amazing. But is this like, do I believe that we're getting to the 5D consciousness? I don't know. I first of all, I don't know. Second of all, I think that this is actually cyclical, right? There's one thing that I really like to think. I'm maybe gonna leave you with this. There's this this novel by Arthur C. Clarke called Childhood's End. If you haven't read it, because it basically, without spoilers, at some point the aliens arrive and they are really interesting because they tell you, we're gonna make your life amazing, but we are in charge and you cannot do anything because we're so much better than you. And then something funny happens. So I really like, if you, that's something that I think it could happen pretty much.
Well, we don't have 5D consciousness yet, but we do have witch talk. So that's the closest thing.
Is it
the closest thing? To,
yeah, we're screwed.
Well, I want to ask you the final question, I guess, Marco. You've spoken about these things. We've spoken about these practices of engaging, of experimenting, of observing, and I think the important word is doing. So what is your, I guess, final message for this audience who may have been either triggered or slightly interested by tonight's conversation?
Well, should I do that? Well, there's a book that tells you.
Selling a bloody book. And there's an amazing discount as well.
Exactly. I know. Seriously, what I would suggest to you all is that if tonight's chats have been of interest, remember that all you need to do to go deeper into yourself is just to start doing it. You really don't need to buy the book. You really don't need to do anything. You just have to learn to accept the possibility that there's incredible vistas out there for you to discover, and you just have to start doing it.
So who knew that we could fit so many gods into one basement in Leamington Spa? But we did it tonight. I hope we've given you the tools to juggle with reality. And it does feel like occasionally any space can become a magical space with enough intention. And I hope we've done a little bit of that for some of you tonight. Marco's books are available for purchase upstairs at a heavy discount. If you're wondering, well, the prices are weird.
Because he's weird.
No, it's £6.66. Some of you in the audience are automatically going to get that. The book is priced slightly weird because if you buy a ticket and a book, it adds up to £18.75. Crowley was born in 1875. Magic is real and so is spelling. So I just want, on that note, for you to realize the bar is open. I think it's open till 11 p.m. So do drink with us. Do ask Marco lots of wild questions about the aliens that you've seen in the past week. And on that wonderful note, I want to thank you for being here. Please put your hands together and thank the wonderful Marco Visconti.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.